Hey guys, everything new under the sun here. So I got a article from CNN Money, and if you want to know what leads to hyperinflation and the end of the U.S. Dollar as the world's reserve currency, this is likely it. China leads global U.S. debt dump. China dumped billions of America's debt in December. The largest owner of U.S. debt, China sold 18 billion of U.S. Treasury debt in December. It's not alone. Japan sold even more, 22 billion in the past year. Mexico, Turkey, Belgium have also lowered the holdings of U.S. debt, all of which led to a record annual dump by central banks. Now, they're doing this partly to prop up their own economies, and it's probably in the war folder for China also, because China doesn't exactly like stop that playing. China doesn't exactly like the U.S. Obviously, China wants to rule the world, and as is confirmed by their hoarding of gold, they want to be the next world reserve currency. But what's going to happen is when all these U.S. dollars come back home to the U.S., that means there's going to be a whole bunch of U.S. dollars floating around the U.S. that they won't know what to do with. That means everybody's going to have a little bit more money floating around that's freed up, that's in the economy, and all of a sudden people will start paying more for things, and because they have more money. And so that means inflation. That means more dollars for the same product. Now everybody's going to be fighting for the same thing, but each and every person is going to have a few more dollars to spend on that same thing, so they're going to be willing to pay a little bit more for it. And so what you'll see is the hyperinflation start shooting off there, and just skyrocketing. And so that's what's coming, and that's the problem with these dollars coming back to the U.S. Many countries are suffering from global economic slowdown, forcing central banks to pull out the stops to help buttress their economy. So that's what they're doing initially. Central banks in Japan and Sweden have resorted to negative interest rates to spur banks to lend. The European Central Bank is buying bonds issued by its member countries. The People's Bank of China is injecting cash into its financial system. For many central banks, selling U.S. treasuries give them cash to prop up their collapsing economies. And I should add that they want to spend it before the U.S. dollar is worth nothing. And they likely have a brain to realize that is also occurring, that the U.S. dollar is becoming worth less every day that they hold it. Because that's never going to be paid back. It's not backed up by anything. These interventions are trying to add some air to the parachute, says Win Thin, head of emerging market currency strategy for Brown Brothers Harriman. In total, central banks sold off a net $225 billion in U.S. Treasury debt last year, the most since at least 1978, the last year of available data. In 2014, there was a net increase of $45 billion, according to CNN's Money. Foreign governments sold more U.S. Treasuries than they bought in 11 out of 12 months last year. The U.S. debt dump is a sign of two things: how aggressive central banks are acting to keep their economies afloat amid global weakness, and two, after years of building up savings, the so-called global savings glut, countries are starting to sell off their reserves. And here's a chart. U.S. debt is dumped in 2015. And it's dumped because the economy, they're recognizing the economy's tanking. Everybody's trying to save their own bottoms. They're trying to save their own economies. So everybody's selling off what they had for U.S. reserves. Now, what this means is that with all these U.S. dollars on the market now, now the price is going to be cheaper for U.S. dollars, which means they're not worth as much. So now you need to spend more to get the same number, and that's inflation there. That's the decrease. In terms of the inverted money pyramid, when the U.S. dollar is at its highs right now because all of the economies are doing badly. When you start to see the U.S. dollar decrease in value, devalue, and it's because of this, all these U.S. dollars flooding the market. Now there's a whole bunch of U.S. dollars and people aren't willing to pay as much per U.S. dollar. That's when you see people start moving into gold, because now they're trying to get out of the safe haven, the wealth preservation of the US dollar, and they're going to start getting into gold. They'll recognize that US dollar is now decreasing in value instead of increasing, and they'll want to pull their money out of US dollars even quicker, so it's going to be a snowball effect, and they're going to move to gold. So this is going to add more trouble. A weak currency often reflects a slow or shrinking economy. For instance, Russia and Brazil are both in recession and their currencies have collapsed in value. Both these countries, along with many developing countries, depend on commodities like oil, metals, food to power their growth. Commodity prices, especially oil prices, tanked last year and have continued in 2016. China spent $500 billion last year to prop up its currency, the yuan, despite all China's holdings by public institutions and private investors of U.S. Treasury debt is up a bit from a year ago. That's also true for a majority of countries. Total foreign increased in December. Holdings increased in December compared to a year ago. So even though central banks are dumping U.S. dollars debt, there's plenty of demand for it by private investors. So that's maybe good, and maybe that's CNN spin. Again, you got to take everything CNN says with a grain of salt, as with any news source. So I hope that's the case, but the market indicators, the stock markets don't reflect that. The economy is going downwards, and we're going to see a flight to safe havens, i.e. precious metals. And with this big glut of selling, I don't know if there's enough private investors to actually buy up all this. Regardless, I think the price of US dollars is going to go down. The value of US dollars is going to go down, and that's going to lead to a further slowdown. So I'll leave it at there, and but that is the news out of China and the news out of many countries. People, they're all selling it off. A, it's to prop up their own economy, and B, it's going to lead to massive economic slowdown and US dollars coming home to the US, which means inflation. So it's inflating on both sides. You're going to be able to buy less. The purchasing power of the US dollar is decreasing, and this is the sign that we are at the end of the period of the safe haven in the inverted money pyramid, and that people are moving to gold. So watch out. This is going to come. This is going to happen this year, it looks like.